Betty descended slowly down the wide staircase of the business centre, mechanically adjusting the strap of her purse on her shoulder. Her heels resonated loudly on the marble steps, marking the rhythm of another failed day. She'd spent almost an hour in the reception area of a major commercial company's human resources director, and it all ended the same way as always, with a polite refusal. "You see, you have impressive experience in management positions. You speak fluent French." The HR manager, a serious woman in her 40s, paused meaningfully, nervously tapping her pen against the table. "But unfortunately, there's a point in your history that prevents us from—" She trailed off. "In short, we highly value the company's reputation." Stepping out onto the street, Betty shivered from the biting November wind. Her elegant transitional coat, from that prosperous life that now seemed so distant, no longer kept her warm as it once did. And the heels of her beloved Italian ankle boots were completely worn out. She didn't even have the money to buy new ones. In the battered van that travelled the dilapidated streets of the suburban neighbourhood, Betty mentally calculated the money she had left. Her mother's pension was barely enough for basic utilities and essential medications. Their last savings were melting away like the first snow. What if I really have to start working as a supermarket cashier? A cowardly thought crossed her mind, but she immediately dismissed it. The last time she'd been fired after a week as soon as the supermarket's security department checked her documents. When she got to the 4th floor, the elevator was out of order again. Betty tried to put on a cheerful expression. Her mother already worried too much. There was no need to make her suffer more. "Daughter," a weak voice from the room tightened her heart. "Yes, Mum, can you believe it? Today I even had time to stop by the pharmacy. They had your pills at a discount." Betty avoided mentioning that she had bought the medicine at the cheapest pharmacy on the outskirts of the city, losing almost an hour on the trip. That night, lying in her small room, she looked at the ceiling and thought about how strange life was. Just 3 years ago, she had a prestigious job, a new apartment with a mortgage, and plans for the future. And now, a conviction for a fraud she didn't commit, a rented apartment on the outskirts, and endless job rejections. "My God, just any job," Betty whispered, feeling her eyes sting with treacherous tears. The next morning began with reviewing the job ads in the local newspaper. Betty's gaze stopped on a line. "Important construction company seeks cleaner, afternoon work hours." The salary wasn't high, but it was stable, and the evening schedule allowed her to look for something else during the day. The company was located in a new office building. Betty nervously adjusted the only decent outfit she had left in her closet, bought at a clearance sale. At the reception, she was greeted by an elderly secretary. "For the job, please see the head of security, 3rd office on the right." Mr. Smith turned out to be a tall man around 45 with an attentive look in his grey eyes. He examined her documents without rushing, occasionally looking at her over his thin wire-rimmed glasses. 2 college degrees, languages, and a conviction on a fraud charge, he said without reproach, simply stating a fact. "Yes, unfortunately," Betty tensed automatically, expecting another refusal. "Tell me more," Mr. Smith unexpectedly suggested, leaning back in his chair. And she told him about her job at a pharmacy chain, about the owner who supposedly fell in love with her, about the fake contract, and how she ended up being the only culprit in a perfectly orchestrated scam. "You know, Betty, I'm used to trusting my intuition," the head of security said thoughtfully after listening to her. "And my intuition tells me you're telling the truth. The job is not complicated, but it does require responsibility. Do you think you can handle it?" Betty gasped in surprise. "Of course, I'm ready to start even today." Mr. Smith laughed. "Then let's do the paperwork. But keep in mind, everything here is under camera surveillance. It's not a threat, just so you know." In the Human Resources Department, she was received by Abigail, a pleasant middle-aged woman with kind brown eyes. While they filled out the documents, she asked Betty about her family, learned about her mother's illness, and even invited her to a piece of freshly baked cabbage pie she had brought to work. Here are the keys to the cleaning closet. Everything you need is there, Abigail explained, showing her the place. The hours are from 6 p.m. when most employees have already left. If you don't understand something, don't be afraid to ask. The first night, Betty was surprised to realize that cleaning could be rewarding. The office was quiet and calm. Only a few employees who stayed late would greet her kindly. What Betty liked most was cleaning the huge windows with a view of the city at sunset, as if by washing the glass she was also cleaning the dirt of the past, starting her life from scratch. Returning home that night, Betty felt a spark of hope for the first time in a long time. Even if it was just a cleaning job, they had treated her with humanity there, without reproaches for her past, and that already meant a lot. A week passed since she started at the company. Betty was already comfortable with her tasks when Abigail called her into her office. "Betty, I have a small favor to ask you. There's an important meeting tomorrow and we need to prepare the conference room. I usually ask the girls from accounting to do it, but they're all tied up with the quarterly closing." On the table was a considerable stack of documents. "Here are the reports from the last quarter. You need to organize them by folders and place them in the assigned spots for each meeting participant. Can you do it?" Betty nodded, although she tensed up inside. Since what happened, working with documents gave her a certain anxiety. "Here's the floor plan of the room and the list of documents for each person," Abigail said, handing her a sheet. "But please be very careful, okay? These are financial reports, you know." Betty worked with special care. She checked each document twice, comparing them with the list. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed the figure of Leon Smith, the head of security, crossing the hallway. He was clearly observing her, although he pretended he was just passing by. Once she finished with the papers, she started cleaning, wiping down the table and chairs, washing the coffee cups left from the previous meeting. On the windowsill, she saw a ficus plant, watered it, and wiped its dusty leaves. "I've been working here for years, and I'd never noticed that plant," Abigail said, smiling as she came in to check on the work. The next morning, Betty arrived early on purpose to check everything one more time. At 9 a.m., the meeting participants began to arrive. She waited in the hallway, nervous, fidgeting with the edge of her work smock. What if I made a mistake? But everything was in order. After lunch, Abigail called her to her office. On the table, 2 steaming cups of coffee and a box of chocolates were waiting. "Sit down, let's have some tea," she smiled. "You know, I gave you that job on purpose. I wanted to check something. Forgive me. I'm an old suspicious lady." As Betty listened to the HR manager's slow account of how difficult it was to find honest employees and how they had been cheated the last time, she took in her surroundings. "And you did everything perfectly and even noticed the plant. Can you imagine? I hadn't watered it on purpose and for a week. I wanted to see if anyone would notice," Abigail said with a complicit smile. "Abigail, but why all the fuss?" Betty asked, surprised. "Because, my dear, a person's character is revealed in the small details. Whoever is careless with the small things also fails with the big ones." That evening, as she finished her shift, Betty accidentally bumped into Leon Smith. "Good job today," he nodded and added as if it were nothing. "By the way, there's an assistant position opening up in accounting. If you're interested, stop by Abigail's office tomorrow. You can talk about the details." On her way home, Betty thought that for the first time in a long time she felt useful. They had tested her, yes, but not like a criminal, but like someone who could be trusted, and that meant so much. That night, the office was unusually lively. Important negotiations with French investors had just concluded. Betty deliberately stayed later, waiting for everyone to leave so she could clean the meeting room in peace. Finally, the last participants left the room, chatting animatedly in French. She began her usual routine. She picked up loose papers, empty coffee cups, and wiped drops off the glass tabletop. When she got to the printer to dust it, she noticed someone had forgotten some pages in the tray. "I should take them to reception," she thought. But as she picked up one of the sheets, her eyes reflexively fell on some familiar words. Having worked as a translator in an international company hadn't been in vain. She instinctively began to read. It was a contract draft, an investment for the construction of a new residential complex. There were two versions, one in English and one in French. Apparently they had been used during the negotiation. Something about the wording of the French text seemed odd to her. Betty sat down in one of the chairs and spread both versions on the table. With each paragraph she read, her unease grew. The discrepancies were notable. While the English version spoke of equal conditions between partners, the French one included clauses that gave the investors majority control. One point particularly caught her attention. It allowed for the unilateral termination of the contract in the event of force majeure. And most worryingly, that force majeure was defined in a suspiciously ambiguous way. "My God, this is a full-blown scam," Betty murmured, feeling a shiver run down her spine. The plan was simple and elegant. Sign the contract, invest money, then declare force majeure and take every last penny, leaving the company in debt. Inside, fear paralyzed her. She remembered how her last attempt to unmask some scammers ended, 3 years in a federal prison and a ruined life. "It's not your business," an inner voice whispered as, "You're just a cleaner. Put the documents back and forget about it." But another voice, firm and persistent, reminded her of Abigail, who had believed in her, of Leon, who gave her a new opportunity. How could she look them in the eye knowing she kept silent? Betty mechanically wiped the windows as French phrases from the contract swirled in her head. What if she was wrong? What if they were just standard clauses? No, her experience in legal translation told her otherwise. It was an obvious scam. "If I keep quiet, I will betray those who believed in me," she thought as she closed the windows. "If I speak up, they may not believe me, they may think I'm meddling, they'll fire me, and then everything will be over." She walked home. Even though a bothersome autumnal drizzle was falling on the city, she had to make a decision. She remembered her mother's face the day the sentence was announced. "My little girl, how was this possible?" No, she couldn't allow another injustice. The next morning, Betty made a decision. Come what may, she thought as she walked up the steps to the office. After all, the truth is always one, no matter what language it's written in. There was an unusual bustle in the director's reception area. The French partners had already arrived for the contract signing. Their rapid conversation reached Betty. With determination, she knocked on Abigail's office door. "Abigail, excuse me, but this is very important." Betty placed both versions of the contract on the table. The HR manager raised her eyebrows in surprise, but listened intently to her agitated account. "Here," she asked curtly, and walked briskly towards the director's office. Minutes later, Betty was called into the director's office. The large office with panoramic windows was full of people. The CEO, Gregory Howard, was sitting at the head of the table, nervously tapping his pen. The French guests were whispering to each other in a corner of the office. Betty noticed Mr. Smith watching everything attentively. "So you're our great French expert." The director's voice was full of barely contained anger. "By what right are you reading confidential documents? Can you explain that to me?" Betty took a deep breath. "I'm sorry, but I couldn't stand by. There are serious discrepancies in the contracts. There's an attempt at fraud hidden between the lines. If I were wrong, I would have kept quiet, but this is important." She spoke calmly, first in English and then in French, precisely quoting the questionable passages of the contract. One of the Frenchmen suddenly paled and muttered something hurried to his colleague. "How dare you!" Gregory Howard stood up abruptly. "A cleaner is coming to teach me how to do business. You're fired. Leave the building immediately." "Greg, if I may." Leon Smith's voice sounded surprisingly firm. "Before you make a decision, I suggest we verify the information, especially since our guests seem to have become noticeably nervous." Abigail was already calling the company's lawyer. A tense silence settled in the room. Betty remained by the window, feeling her legs trembling. One of the Frenchmen began to pack his things, citing urgent matters. Mr. Smith gave a brief look at the security personnel stationed by the door. "Gentlemen, I'm afraid you'll have to stay a little longer," he said, taking some documents from his folder. "The security department has found some interesting information about your company, or rather about the fact that such a company doesn't even exist." What followed was like a blurred dream. It turned out that the French investors were common scammers using fake documents, and the duplicated contract trick was their usual technique. They had already cheated several large companies in other cities with that method. "Betty," the director looked embarrassed, "I apologize. You have saved the company from huge problems. We would like to offer you another position." "We can talk about that later," Abigail intervened gently but firmly, lovingly hugging the still shaking Betty by the shoulders. "For now, what we all need is a good cup of tea." In Abigail's office, warming her hands with a cup of hot tea, Betty felt the tension of the last few days begin to ease. "You know," Abigail said thoughtfully, "sometimes you have to be in the wrong place at the wrong time just to end up right where you're meant to be." Leon Smith had been working tirelessly for several days. His office had become a real investigation headquarters. On the walls appeared photos of the investors, diagrams of their connections, documents from other cities. It was discovered that the scammers operated nationwide using the same method of duplicated contracts. "Look at this, Betty," he said, placing several photos on the table. "Do you recognize anyone?" In one of them, a group of Frenchmen was talking with a tall man in an expensive suit. "That's Richard, our senior lawyer," she exclaimed. "Exactly! Now we understand how they got access to the company's internal documentation." Just then, Abigail entered the office with a cup of coffee for Leon Smith. "How's everything going?" "It's going very well," he replied with a smile. "Not only do we owe our Betty for exposing the scam, but also for exposing a whole criminal network." A couple of days later, agents from the Economic Security Unit arrived at the office. They arrested Richard and two of the Frenchmen right at their workstations. As it turned out, they had been preparing the fraud for months, forging documents, creating fictitious companies, and establishing connections within the company. "You know what's most interesting?" Mr. Smith commented to Betty as they had coffee. "They were discovered by a small detail. They used an online translator for the translation without even imagining that there might be someone on staff who spoke fluent French and had experience in legal translation." Gregory Howard personally thanked Betty in front of the entire team. "Thanks to the vigilance and professionalism of our employee, the company avoided multi-million-dollar losses. I believe such qualities deserve special recognition," he said. Abigail beamed as if she were being honored herself. After the meeting, she hugged Betty tightly. "I told you a person's character is revealed in the details. You didn't even leave a half-dead ficus without attention. How could you let an international scam pass by?" Betty returned home in high spirits. Her heart was light. She had done the right thing. She hadn't been scared. She hadn't kept silent. Now, not only had she not been fired, but she had been offered a new position with a good salary. "Mum," she said that night, hugging her mother, "it seems our streak of bad luck is over. Everything's going to be okay now." "Sit down, Betty," Gregory Howard said, gesturing to a chair in his office. A week had passed since the incident with the scammers, and the director's tone had changed remarkably. Now it sounded with genuine respect. "I have a serious proposal for you. A new Department of International Cooperation is opening up in the company, and we need someone with your qualifications." Betty, confused, fidgeted with the edge of her blouse. "But my past, are you sure that won't harm the company's reputation?" The director smiled slightly. "After you saved us from the scammers, on the contrary, that experience is very valuable. A person who has gone through trials like that knows exactly where to look for deceit." In the hallway, Abigail was already waiting for her. "So, did you accept?" And without waiting for an answer, she hugged Betty. "I told Gregory there was no better candidate." The news of the former cleaner's promotion spread quickly through the office. Some sincerely congratulated her, while others were perplexed. Meanwhile, the new head of the legal department, Ted, was openly indignant. This is unheard of. A person with a criminal record is going to lead international negotiations. That night, in Abigail's office, Betty voiced her doubts. What if I can't do it? So many years have passed, I've forgotten everything. Nonsense, Abigail interrupted her decisively. You perfectly unravelled the French documents. The rest is just a matter of practice. She poured them her favourite cups with flowers. I also started from scratch. My husband died. I was left alone with my little boy. I thought I couldn't take it, that I would break. But then I understood strength isn't in not falling, but in getting up. The next day, Betty entered her new office for the first time, small but bright, with a view of the city park. On the desk, there was already a plaque. Betty, head of the Department of International Cooperation. It took her breath away with emotion. Mr. Smith appeared at the door. I was thinking, how about we organise a small get-together? We can celebrate your appointment. His eyes sparkled with joy. In the afternoon, her small circle of supporters gathered in Abigail's office. They were having tea with homemade cake, joking and making plans. To a new life, Abigail proclaimed, raising her cup. Thanks to the people who believe in it, Betty added quietly. On her way home, she felt a surprising lightness. There was a lot of work ahead. She needed to learn many things again. But now she knew for sure she would succeed because she had people by her side who were willing to support her and believe in her, no matter what. Mum, you won't believe it, she shouted as she entered the apartment. Seeing her mother's illuminated expression, Betty thought, this is true happiness when you can give joy to the people you love. That evening, sitting in her new office, Betty was reviewing old documents. Her eyes fell on a yellowed photograph from 3 years ago, her happy and smiling, standing next to the entrance of the main office of the Health Plus pharmacy chain. The memories rushed back with renewed force. Back then, everything seemed so clear. She worked as a pharmacist when a tall, elegant man came in. Oliver Murphy, owner of the chain, he introduced himself, smiling charmingly. He started coming every day, buying a few things, talking for a long time, and after a month he invited her to dinner. You know, you have an amazing talent for business, he told her, looking at her with eyes full of love. A talent like yours shouldn't be behind a counter. That's how she became a manager and then a director. She worked from dawn to dusk developing the network and opening new locations. And Oliver admired her. You're my treasure. I wasn't wrong about you. Betty smiled bitterly, remembering her naivety. She believed in the fairy tale about the charming prince, not even thinking about why he was in such a hurry to make her a director. Just sign, my dear, it's just formalities, he said, handing her the documents. At that moment, her mother was hospitalized with a heart attack, and Betty had to go immediately to her hometown. And when she returned a week later, the office was sealed, the accounts were frozen, and Oliver had disappeared, along with all the company's money. How blind I was, Betty whispered, feeling tears welling up in her throat. She remembered the interrogations, the humiliating inspections, the trial, how she tried to prove her innocence, how she sold her apartment to pay the lawyer. And the judge's indifferent voice, "Accused, please stand up. The court delivers its sentence." Someone knocked softly on the door. It was Abigail. "Have you been here long? I saw the light was on." Seeing Betty's tear-streaked face, Abigail sat down silently next to her. "I'm so scared, Abigail," Betty confessed quietly. "I'm afraid of making the same mistake again, of trusting the wrong people. Maybe I'll miss something, not see the trap." She told her everything, the beautiful love story that turned into a nightmare, the betrayal, the broken dreams. "My dear," Abigail caressed her hand, "you know we all have our scars, but that's no reason to stop living. You're no longer that innocent girl. You've grown stronger, and now you're not alone." The rain beat against the window, and they sat in the cosy dimness of the office, talking about the past, about their fears, about hope. "I didn't even dare to name my daughter," Abigail confessed. "I was so afraid that she would repeat my mistakes, and your son grew up to be a wonderful man because you taught him not to be afraid to live." Betty walked back home, feeling a strange sense of relief. In 3 years, she could finally tell everything. She cried out her pain and understood that the past no longer had power over her. Now she knew the value of pretty words. She knew how to read between the lines, and most importantly, she had people by her side willing to support and protect her. In Leon Smith's waiting room, Betty met an unknown man about 35 years old, tall, athletic, with attentive brown eyes and a slight greying at the temples. Marcus White, private detective, he introduced himself. In his handshake, one could feel the confidence of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. "Sit down, Betty," Mr. Smith said, gesturing to a chair. "Marcus has taken an interest in your case. He has a lot of experience unravelling this type of fraud." The detective took a folder from his leather portfolio. "I've reviewed the materials of your case. There are several interesting points that the court, for some reason, ignored." Betty tensed. Talking about the past still hurt. But there was something reassuring in Marcus's calm manner and how he listened intently, taking notes in his notebook. "Tell me more about Oliver Murphy. Did he have any peculiar habits? What was his social circle like? What places did he frequent?" Marcus asked. Betty began to talk, and he asked precise and specific questions. "Where did you meet? Who introduced him as the owner? What documents did he show?" Then the detective suddenly smiled. "You know, Mr. Murphy has already left his mark in 3 other cities. The modus operandi is the same. A beautiful romance, a rapid promotion, then falsified documents." It had already gotten dark when they finished the conversation. "I suggest we continue in a more informal setting," the detective suddenly suggested. "There's a good coffee shop nearby." Betty didn't refuse. Mr. Smith nodded his head in approval. In the cosy coffee shop, under soft jazz music, the conversation became more relaxed. Marcus talked about his investigations, about how important it is to notice the details. Criminals often repeat the same mistakes in the small details. That's what gives them away. Betty was surprised to find herself observing his strong hands with long musical fingers. "And you, good for you, you've managed to start over. Many people give up after something like that," he said with sincere admiration in his voice. "I just didn't have another option," she replied quietly. "My mother always believed in me." They didn't even notice how more than 2 hours passed in the coffee shop. "I'll take on your case," Marcus said firmly as they said goodbye. "This Murphy guy is not getting away with this. It's time to stop him." And then he added softly, "And you know, you can call me by my first name." On her way home, Betty realized she was smiling for the first time in a long time. A man had appeared in her life who didn't cause mistrust, but interest and trust. "Just don't fall in love," she said severely to her reflection in the subway window. But her treacherous heart skipped a beat every time she remembered the attentive gaze of those brown eyes. In the morning, a bouquet of wildflowers and a note appeared on her desk. "Starting the investigation. I await your call. I may need additional details." "Betty, have the documents for the legal department's approval arrived?" The voice of her new assistant, Tessa, pulled her out of her thoughts. The first month in the position of department head was very intense. She had to catch up on current projects, get to know the partners, and establish work processes. Each morning began with a planning meeting. Betty soon understood that the most important thing was to organise the work of her small but united team well. "I have good news for you," she announced one morning. "Our project to build the shopping centre has interested some Belgian investors. We need to prepare a presentation in French." Now she no longer felt nervous in meetings with the CEO. She confidently defended her position. Even the ever-grumpy legal director, Ted, began to treat her with respect after she found a serious error in the contract with suppliers. "Can you believe it?" she told Abigail at night. "Today, I led the negotiations with the French myself. Of course, it was a video call, but I was still very nervous. And then they sent an email saying they liked everything and want to collaborate." She was well liked in the department for her fairness, for her ability to listen, for always being willing to help. When Tessa's son got sick, she let her work from home. The important thing is the result. It doesn't matter where you get it, she told her at the time. Little by little, her financial situation also improved. With her first salary, she paid off old debts. With the second, she bought her mother a new television to replace the old one that didn't work well. "Daughter, why so much expense?" her mother exclaimed. "Because you deserve it," Betty smiled, hugging her. Small traditions began to emerge at work. On Fridays, the whole department would gather for tea and discuss the past week and share plans for the next. Betty always brought homemade cookies, an old recipe inherited from her grandmother. "You know," Abigail said one day, passing by her office at the end of the day, "you've changed. Your eyes sparkle, your posture is straight. You're a true leader." Betty felt embarrassed, but she knew it was true. She no longer felt like someone who was marked. She no longer tried to go unnoticed. "I think we have a new unofficial leader in the company," Mr. Smith once joked, finding her in the hallway. "Soon you'll leave me in the shadows." Betty just smiled. She was no longer afraid to be visible or take on responsibilities. Life had taught her the most important thing, to believe in herself and not to fear the new day. "I have a surprise for you." Abigail literally burst into the office, waving some papers. "Remember you talked about training courses? Well, I got it. The company is paying for your education, the International Business Administration program. Can you imagine?" It was a real gift. Betty had long dreamed of updating her knowledge, but never dared. It was too expensive. "But don't think this is just a handout," Abigail winked. "Gregory Howard is very happy with your work with the Belgians. He says we need to cultivate personnel like you." The team enthusiastically supported her initiative. Tessa offered to help with current matters when classes started. The lawyers offered to share materials on international law. Even the grumpy security guard, Ted, was sympathetic. "Betty, if you're studying late, let me know. I'll make sure no one bothers you." Little by little, the attitude of those who had initially looked at her appointment with suspicion also changed. At a meeting, the chief accountant, Chloe, known for her critical attitude, suddenly said, "What if we put Betty on the audit committee? She has an excellent instinct for numbers." Mr. Smith also stayed in the background. "I look at you and I'm happy. I made the right decision when I hired you. People have intuition. You are trustworthy." One morning, Betty found a large pile of documents on her desk. "These are the projects from the last 5 years, Tessa explained. "We in the team thought they would be useful for your studies. We uploaded the entire archive." Most interestingly, that support inspired her. Her presentations in classes were often cited as an example, and her course project on optimizing international supply chains even interested the professors. "Can you believe it?" she told her mother. "Today Svetlana from accounting came to ask me for advice. I used to be afraid of her. She was so strict." And her mother just smiled, seeing her adult and self-assured daughter. At the company, she was now seen not as a victim of a dark past, but as a competent professional and a reliable person. "Betty won't give you bad advice," became almost a saying in the office. "You know what's most important?" she said to Abigail one day. "I finally feel like I'm in my place. This is a family." "That's right," she nodded, "because a true team is like a family where they celebrate your successes and support you in difficult times. The call from Marcus came on a Saturday morning. "Betty, I have important news. Do you want to take a walk? I have a country house outside the city. We can talk there in peace." Her heart skipped a beat treacherously. They hadn't seen each other in almost 2 weeks, although they called each other regularly for work matters. The country house turned out to be a small, cosy cabin surrounded by apple trees. "It's an inheritance from my parents," Marcus explained, opening the garden gate. On the porch, the table was already set, with hot tea and homemade pies. "Did you make them yourself?" Betty asked, surprised. "No, what are you talking about?" He laughed. "The neighbour gave me a hand. I sometimes help her with things around the house, and she takes care of me with food." But the conversation quickly turned serious. Marcus took out a laptop. "Look what I found. Remember that accountant who supposedly got sick right before the scandal? I found him." A photograph appeared on the screen. It was Oliver Murphy with a group of unknown people. The photo was taken a month after her arrest. And do you know where? In Thailand. Marcus meticulously unfolded documents, bank statements, copies of contracts, and photos in front of her. Here he used another name, and here another one, but the handwriting is the same. Quick acquaintances, romantic relationships, a promotion to a management position. Look closely, he said, moving closer, showing her something on the papers. He smelled of coffee and a slightly strong cologne. Betty realized it was hard for her to concentrate on the papers. The unexpected closeness was too distracting. And here's the main find. Marcus opened another file. Remember that elderly woman who pretended to be his mother? Well, it turns out she's a professional actress. She specializes in supporting roles, and it's not the first time she's been involved in these types of schemes. They had been talking for several hours. Marcus told her how he had collected the information, how he had found the witnesses, and how he had reconstructed the chain of events. You know, he suddenly said, I started this investigation even before I met you. Leon showed me the case documents, and something didn't fit. But when I saw you, I knew I couldn't stand by. The sun was already setting when they went out into the garden. The apple trees were dropping their last leaves. The air smelled of autumn and bonfire smoke. It was cold. Marcus placed his jacket over her shoulders. Their hands accidentally brushed, and they both stood still for a moment. Wait, he said, turning to her. I have to confess something. This case has become more than just work for me. She looked up and got lost in his warm and attentive gaze. I know that after everything that has happened, it's hard for you to trust people, but maybe you'll give me a chance to show you that not all men are scoundrels. Instead of answering, she simply took a step closer and leaned on his shoulder. Marcus hugged her carefully, and they stayed like that, listening to the rustling of the falling leaves and the beating of their hearts. You know, Betty whispered, I was also afraid of this moment. I was afraid of making a mistake again, of trusting again. But with you, everything is different. Marcus held her tighter against him. I will never lie to you, I promise. On the way home, they travelled in a comfortable silence. Soft music played in the car, and the lights of the city in the evening could be seen through the window. Everything felt so right, so natural, as if they had known each other their whole lives. The case file for the review turned out to be quite complete. Marcus personally took the documents to a well-known lawyer specializing in these types of cases. If he accepts the case, it means the chances are good, he explained to Betty. The company provided unexpected support. Gregory Howard assigned a corporate lawyer to assist with the case. Consider this an investment in a valuable employee, he said at a meeting. And the company's reputation will only improve when everyone knows how we defend our people. The sessions followed one after another. Marcus found new witnesses, people who had been affected by Murphy's actions in other cities. Can you imagine, the lawyer would say, he used the same scheme at least 5 times, and on each occasion he found a scapegoat, an honest person to blame for everything. Abigail made a habit of attending every session to provide moral support. I'm just following the process, she would say, but Betty saw how Abigail followed the proceedings attentively, taking notes. The entire department discreetly adjusted their work schedules so that she could attend the trial without any worries. The turning point was the testimony of Oliver Murphy's mother, the actress Paula. Cornered, she irrefutably told everything, how they had been hired to create the image of a happy family, how they rehearsed their roles, how they built the legend of the successful businessman. How could you? Betty couldn't stand it during the cross-examination. You saw that I was not to blame for any of it. The elderly actress lowered her gaze. Forgive me, child, she said. They paid us well, and I thought it was none of my business. On the day of the sentencing, everyone was in the courtroom. Marcus, Abigail, Mr. Smith, her colleagues from the department. Her mother squeezed her hand, muttering a prayer. When the judge read the full acquittal, Betty didn't immediately understand what had happened. It's over, my dear, Her mother hugged her, crying with happiness. "Your nightmare is over." Abigail and Mr. Smith squeezed her hand tightly. "Congratulations, now you are truly free." Marcus drove them home. "Are you coming in?" Betty asked. They sat in the kitchen until late, drinking tea, talking and laughing. For the first time in 3 years, she felt truly happy, as if a heavy stone had been lifted from her soul, as if she had regained the ability to breathe deeply. "You know," she said, saying goodbye to Marcus, "I don't even know how to thank you." He just smiled. "I do. Be happy. Just be happy. That's the best way to thank me." The next day at the office, she was greeted with flowers and congratulations. Gregory Howard personally came to shake her hand. "I am proud that a person like you works at our company, to go through all that and still remain true to yourself." After the case was closed, life continued to move quickly. Although both tried not to rush things, he would pick her up after work. They would walk for a long time through the city in the evening, talking about everything. Betty slowly learned to trust again, although sometimes she felt an inexplicable fear. "You know," she confessed to Abigail one day, "I'm always waiting for a trap. I look at him and I think, is this possible? Can someone be like this without any ulterior motives?" Abigail just smiled. "Of course it's possible, child, and much more than you think. You just have to stop being afraid." Her mother immediately accepted Marcus, feeling in her mother's heart that he was a good person. "I see how he looks at you," she told her daughter. "That's how someone looks at you when they're willing to give their life for someone." That night, Marcus stayed for dinner at their house for the first time, and they stayed up late in the kitchen talking about little Betty. One evening, they went to Marcus's country house together. It was a warm spring day, and the apple trees were in bloom. "Do you remember how we first really talked here?" he asked, hugging her by the shoulders. "At that moment, you were so afraid to trust, and I was afraid to scare you." "And now?" Betty asked softly. "And now I know for sure you are my destiny." At that moment, all the fears, all the doubts disappeared. Only his warm hands remained, the scent of apple blossoms, and an infinite happiness in her heart. A week later, Marcus introduced her to his parents, simple and kind-hearted people. "Finally, my son is settling down," his mother rejoiced. Always working, always working. Now I see it was worth waiting for." In the evenings, they often stayed at Betty's house. She would cook dinner, and Marcus would tinker with her mother's old laptop, adjusting and improving something. Everything was so natural, so right, as if they had always been together. "You know what's most surprising?" Betty said one day as they walked along the waterfront. "I'm no longer afraid to be happy. I used to always expect a trap, and now I just live and enjoy every day." Marcus squeezed her hand tighter. "I've also learned a lot from you. For example, that true strength lies in knowing how to trust no matter what." They were on the bridge watching the sunset, and it seemed as if the whole world was made just for the two of them. And a month later, on a random night, Marcus suddenly knelt in the middle of the street. "Betty, will you marry me? I know it's still early, that you might be scared, but I just can't imagine my life without you." And looking into his eyes full of love, for the first time, she didn't feel fear, only joy and certainty. "Yes," she simply replied, and that yes sounded like the beginning of a new and bright life. "Attention all employees of the company. We invite you to a solemn event." Abigail issued an order to appoint Betty as the Vice President of International Relations. After her conviction was overturned, her career took off quickly. Her experience, knowledge, and reputation had done their work. "Now you're the boss, the real boss," Tessa joked, helping her move things to the new office. Her colleagues were sincerely happy for her success, and Gregory Howard solemnly handed her the keys to the new office. "You've earned it. And, you know, I never regretted trusting you." The wedding preparations were in full swing. Abigail took on the role of the main organizer. "Honey, you have enough worries with your new position. I'll gladly take care of everything." She ran from one restaurant to another, choosing the decor, making guest lists with as much energy as if she were planning her own daughter's wedding. Her mother beamed with happiness as she helped choose the wedding dress. "Daughter, I am so happy to have lived to see this day," she said, discreetly wiping away tears. Her health had improved remarkably. Now they could afford good medications and regular treatment. Marcus insisted that they renovate their future apartment before the wedding, a spacious 3-room apartment in a new building. "I want everything to start from scratch," he explained. Betty visited often to see how the work was progressing, and each time her heart stopped at the thought, "Soon this will be our home." On the wedding day, the weather was exceptionally sunny. Mr. Smith, who took on the role of giving the bride away, walked Betty to the altar. Marcus was waiting for her under an arch decorated with living flowers, and his eyes shone with such happiness that the guests could barely breathe. "Kiss!" the guests shouted. Among them were the entire team from the construction company. They already considered the new employee part of the family. "Now she's the first," Abigail said proudly, raising her glass, "to the newlyweds, to a new life." Everyone raised their glasses in unison. Betty, spinning in her first dance with her husband, thought about how amazing life is. Sometimes it is necessary to go through all the trials to find true happiness. In the evening, when the main festivities were over, Marcus and Betty went out into the restaurant's garden. "You know," he said, hugging her, "I always think about how lucky I was when Leon showed me your case, as if destiny itself had guided us to each other." Betty leaned on his shoulder. "And I am grateful for all the trials. Without them, I would not have met so many wonderful people, nor would I have learned to value true friendship and love." In the depths of the garden, music played. The sky was covered with stars, and it seemed that the entire universe was celebrating their happiness. The next day, the newlyweds left for their honeymoon, 2 weeks on the French Riviera. "It's symbolic," Abigail smiled, hugging them at the airport. "French once changed your life, and now it's leading you to a new happiness." Marcus and Betty's country house was flooded with flowers. A year after the wedding, they decided to host a big party for everyone who had supported them. The old apple orchard, where their story began, was now meticulously cared for. Marcus spent every weekend there, turning his parents' country house into a cozy family nest. "Well, tell us." Abigail was the first to notice the special glow in Betty's eyes. "When is the new arrival expected?" Betty smiled shyly, placing her hand on her belly. "In 7 months, but don't tell Mum." The guests arrived little by little. Mr. Smith came with his wife, bringing a huge bouquet of roses. Tessa, now a department head herself, showed off her ring. Chloe, who had recently retired, brought her signature pie. Even Gregory Howard came to say hello despite his busy schedule. They set up tables in the garden and the weather was wonderful. Her mother helped set the dishes. After the illness, she had recovered remarkably, especially since the young couple insisted that she move closer to them. "Do you remember how it all started?" Mr. Smith raised his cup to the interview for the cleaning position. "And look at her now, a businesswoman, a happy wife, soon to be a mum." He winked at an embarrassed Betty. Yes, the old security guard knows everything." Marcus laughed. "And I thank fate for every day of trials. Without them, we would have never met." Abigail discreetly wiped away a tear. "My children, the most important thing is that you have found each other, and soon your love will be even greater." The night flew by with conversations, memories, and plans for the future. Betty told them about the new international project she had been entrusted with. Marcus, the director of the detective agency, now had a whole team under his command. When it got dark, they lit the garlands in the garden. Betty looked at the dear faces and thought about how amazing her life had been. Each of these people had played a part in her destiny, helping her not to break, to believe in herself. "What are you thinking about?" Marcus sat next to her. "About everything that awaits us," she said, resting her head on his shoulder. Now I know for sure there are no dead ends. The most important thing is to continue being a good person and to believe in goodness. That night, when the guests had left, they stayed in the garden together for a long time. They talked about the future baby, about plans to expand the house, about new projects. Life stretched out before them like a wide road, full of hope and possibilities. "It seems we've finally earned our happiness," Betty whispered. "We've learned to value it," Marcus replied. "And now we know for sure, together we will overcome any test." In the darkness, the garden smelled of apples and happiness. In the distance, the city lights shone, reminding them that life goes on, offering new opportunities and new stories. And here, in this cozy corner of their little paradise, their shared destiny was being written.